Did you know that you can use your last will and testament to make your friends and family do a lot of weird stuff? Janis Joplin, the talented singer and notorious partier, died tragically young at the age of 27 in 1970, but what she didn't do is let her tragic death stop her from partying with her friends. In her will, she stipulated that $2,500 of her money be set aside for her friends to gather for one big blowout farewell party. Now, you're probably thinking, sure, but that's Janis Joplin. She's a famous musician. They do all kinds of eccentric things. But the great thing about leaving instructions in a will is that it's really hard for friends and family to ignore your last wishes, especially when the law often supports the requests and money is set aside for them. And you don't have to be a celebrity. In 2013, a UK man named Roger Brown lost his battle with prostate cancer. He wanted to cheer up his friends and leave them with a happy memory of him, which is why he put in his will to set aside about $5,000 for his friends to have an alcohol-fueled blowout trip in his honor. Most people don't like thinking about wills because it reminds them of dying. However, because wills are important for people to have for the safety of their loved ones and the security of their belongings, it's worth talking about the genuinely crazy things you can do with a will. For instance, did you know that you can talk shit about people? There is no better place to get the final word over someone than when it's literally your final words. So when you start putting together your own will, consider who you might want to trash talk from beyond the grave. A great example is William Shakespeare, one of history's greatest romantic writers. It turns out that his real life was maybe not as passionate as Romeo and Juliet. He was married to a woman named Anne Hathaway. No, not that Anne Hathaway. And when Shakespeare died, he left nearly everything he owned to his daughter Susanna. But he did mention his wife Anne once in his will, saying that she could have some of the furniture and my second best bed. Now, to be or not to be is a memorable Shakespeare quote, but my second best bed is a pretty good one too. In a last will and testament, you're allowed to be really petty. In 1888, a man named Albert Orton died at 70, and when his will was read, he had left his wife a single farthing in his will. That's the British version of a penny. So why did Albert do his wife so dirty? Well, he wanted her to know that she only got a penny because she constantly hurt his feelings by calling him a rotten old pig. Now, the capper to that story is that she said she only called him that because he wouldn't stop farting all the time. But I've got some bad news for Albert's wife. He is not going to be smelling better anytime soon. The most epic level of pettiness in a last will and testament has to belong to a Portuguese aristocrat named Luis Carlos de Noronha Cabral de Câmara. Luis was an incredibly wealthy man, and like many people as rich as him, it didn't bring him happiness. By all accounts, he was pretty miserable. He had no wife or children, so there was no family for him to leave his immense wealth to, but he absolutely hated the government and refused to let his money end up in their hands. So he did what any lonely old rich person would do. He grabbed the Lisbon phone book and randomly chose 70 people to divide his estate among. In 2001, when he died, 70 random people got phone calls about a big chunk of money from someone they didn't know and never met. Now that is petty. While a last will and testament can't save you from eventual death, it does allow you to make some strange requests that still kind of keep you around after you've died. Take Jeremy Bentham, for example. He was an English professor who died at the age of 84 in the mid-1800s. He had already decided to donate his body to his physician friend to be dissected, because I guess that's something you do when you're friends with a doctor? But near the end of his life, he doubled down. He added to his will that after his friend was done dissecting him, he wanted the friend to reassemble his body and put it on display in a glass cabinet for people to see. He called this nightmarish idea being an auto icon. And his friend did it. Jeremy Bentham's body is still currently on display in a glass case on campus at the University College London. However, his head didn't preserve too well, so they had to replace it with a wax one. But, believe it or not, the hair is still real. You can use your will to continue paying people to work for you even long after you're dead. That's exactly what John Bowman did back in the late 1800s. Bowman was a wealthy man struck by the tragic loss of his wife and daughter in less than a year. Because of that trauma, Bowman became obsessed with the idea of reincarnation. In fact, he spent a large part of his fortune preparing his home for the return of his family. He believed so strongly that they would be back, he wrote instructions into his will. When he died in 1891, he set aside $50,000 into a trust to continue paying his servants to keep the house running and serve dinner every night in anticipation of Bowman's return with his wife and child. Now, the servants continued their jobs for almost 60 years until the money ran out in 1950. But at least it kept those servants in a steady job. Honestly, that might be the best thing that a rich person has done with their money for a long time. Napoleon Bonaparte nearly conquered the world, which tells you what he thinks of himself and his own importance, which explains why he chose to do the creepiest thing possible with his last will and testament. I'm sure when he passed away, Napoleon's family was excited about the possibility of what riches, land, and other valuables might be left to them. But they weren't prepared for what he actually gave them, because he gave them hair, his own hair. This is what he wrote in his will. Marchand shall preserve my hair and cause a bracelet to be made of it, with a little gold clasp, to be sent to the Empress Maria Louisa, and to my mother, and to each of my brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, the cardinal, and one of larger size for my son. So, the obscenely wealthy emperor and conqueror left his family a bunch of creepy Napoleon hair bracelets. Which begs the question, how much hair did Napoleon have exactly? Now, one underrated thing you can do with your last will and testament is to ask a friend to turn you into a musical instrument. And yes, this really happened. It's the story of Solomon Sanborn. He was a proud Massachusetts resident and a hat maker by trade. He was a true American patriot who loved to hear stories of triumph from the Revolutionary War. He particularly loved stories of the Battle of Bunker Hill. That's why when he died, he made the obvious request to have his doctor friend carefully remove all the skin from his body. Wait for it, this will make sense. Solomon asked his doctor friend to use his skin to make drum heads to put onto 2 drums, and he requested that those drums be given to the drummer who plays at the Bunker Hill Memorial every year on the anniversary of the battle. He wanted to be the drum that they played Yankee Doodle Dandy on. So, when you're creating your last will and testament, ask yourself this: do you have a friend who will skin you and play a patriotic song on your skin? I know I don't. Sometimes people become so famous for something in their life that it spills over into their death. And part of the reason for that is because of strange requests that they make in their last will and testament. For example, Fred Bauer was the inventor of the original tube design that they served Pringles in. So guess what he requested to be buried in? You guessed it, Fred was interred into the ground in a Pringles can. The same goes for Mark Gruenwald, a comic book writer for Marvel Comics. His most famous and beloved creation was the superhero series Squadron Supreme. So when he died, he thought of a clever way to become part of his own stories. He requested in his will that his ashes be mixed with the ink that was used to do a reprinting of his Squadron Supreme stories. But maybe the best one is veteran theatrical stagehand John Reed, who loved the theater and was proud to have dedicated his life to it. And he dedicated more of himself to it in his will, leaving his own skull to a Philadelphia theater to use in the famous gravedigger scene from Shakespeare's play Hamlet. There are tons of things you can do with a strategically written will. You can make your friends throw a party, you can throw some shade on friends and enemies left behind, you can pay a house full of servants to serve dinner nightly to people who have been dead for decades. You can even request that your body sit on display in a college lobby. Having a last will and testament is important to protect your loved ones, and we should all consider getting one, but it also never hurts to make it kind of fun. What kind of insane demands would you put in your will? That's it for this episode of No Way That's Legal. If you want more hilariously unbelievable stories about the law, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.